Get started then. And thanks for starting the recording. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Karen Williams, co-chair of the Portland Utility Board, and thanks for joining. Since we have quorum, I'll call the meeting to order. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is being recorded. The public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the agenda and can also provide written testimony by writing to utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. PUB believes and acts upon anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with PUB. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that's targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. This means stepping up as a community when there's wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. In order to put these principles into action, we speak up and we speak out. Every one of us is empowered to maintain the culture of PUB, and we will focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning conduct, but not people.
All right, my name is Amy Archer-Masters, and I will quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, the name of the person you're addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by the hosts, the PUB staff, Eliza, and myself, so please limit to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for technical assistance, or reminding us that you've been waiting to speak if you've not been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. The co-hosts may lower your hand once you've begun speaking, just to maintain the flow of the conversation. During the public comment periods, the public can raise their hands and you'll be called on when appropriate. If you're connecting by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. The videos may be turned on for the board, presenters, or facilitators when you're speaking. If desired, it's not required. Others should leave your videos off. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Members of the public will be muted except when giving public comment. If you're connecting by phone, please press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through chat with PUB staff or raise your hand during the public comment period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. I'll pass it back to you, Karen. You're muted, Karen.
And I was being so eloquent, thank you. So quick look at our agenda for today. We have a few hellos and welcomes to do at the beginning of the meeting, and then we'll move into any disclosure of communications, our usual public comment period, and review of three sets of minutes, I believe, a subcommittee and 2 full PUB meeting minutes. We will then take a look, a final look, we hope, at the budget letter that we developed or began developing at the last meeting, and then have a brief presentation from the Bureau of Environmental Services, sort of a status update and overview of the rate study report. We had some discussion about that at the last meeting and the status of it. And then we have, it says brief items on the agenda, but very important items regarding the spring budget update. And we'll have Amy walk us through that before any other announcements, and we will adjourn at 5 o'clock. So let's move to some hellos. We want to welcome our new liaison from Commissioner Mapp's office, Guldan Salazar, and also Christopher Richard, who is going to be joining us this beginning July. And Christopher will replace Jasmine Varela as the labor representative on PUB. So good opportunity to welcome Christopher and thank Jasmine for their service. And just wondering if Guldan or...
This is Eliza, and she is not yet in the room. I'm
Okay.
guessing spring bump work session this morning is maybe continuing for her. So maybe we can put Christopher on the spot to just say hello, and then the rest of you all can say hello back and do any disclosures you have.
Hello, this is Chris Richard. I work in BES as an accountant. I am a DCTU member. I've been with the city for roughly 13 years as an accountant. I have worked as a buyer before in the private sector as well as an accountant. I was the accounting supervisor for 7 years for Adidas on Greeley, and I've also been a buyer probably for about 10 years. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christopher, for a great quick introduction there. And we look super forward to working with you. And thanks again for stepping forward for this position. It's a lot of work, and we really appreciate your time. Okay, do we have disclosures from anyone that they would like to get on the record? Tom, please go ahead.
This is Tom Lipton. I had a conversation with Andy Reese. He's one of the consultants on the BES rate study. And he and I go back about 30 years. And I actually thought the rate study was concluded. And I'm a little confused because we didn't really talk about it. But I got the impression that he's still working on it. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that since it is an ongoing study to date anyway by the Bureau.
All right, thanks, Tom. Any other disclosures from any of our PUB members that you'd like to get on the record? Okay, not seeing any hands or having anybody pipe up. Let's move on to taking a look. Oh, I'm sorry. One more kind of sad, sad but happy note. And I think Eliza actually is going to, have some kudos and well wishes for Alex Lopez.
So Alex had intended to come to the meeting today to announce that he could no longer participate in the meetings, the regular full board meetings. He got a new job relatively recently, and it was being a handling public information for the state's, I'm going to get the department wrong, but Department of Geology or something like that. And he thought he could balance both and his other community responsibilities, and that he's tried and it's not working. He may be able to pop in to say hello to everybody and at a future meeting. But what he was committed to doing was continuing to participate on the interview team or the recruitment subcommittee. And so I told him I would double check with you all that there were no objections to him basically continuing to serve out probably through June, so he can serve on the recruitment committee, but he won't be attending these standing full board meetings. So if there's any objections to that, I guess raise your hand. Otherwise, I think, Karen, that's a thumbs up, not an objection, correct?
That was a thumbs up, not an objection.
Great. So yeah,
he will.
So
his contributions will definitely be missed.
Eliza, this is Kaliska. I just have a quick question. Does this mean we have to backfill his position?
we're running recruitment now, and I think that's partly why he was really trying hard. When he first took the job, I think he announced it like when one of our hellos and greetings. I feel like maybe he hasn't. I don't remember, you all. I'm sorry. But he had been in communication with me and said, I really want to stay on the board. It's really important to me. So he'd been doing everything he could to balance it. But I think he gets meetings scheduled under him often, and it's just kind of not proving not to be possible. So I think he realized because we were in recruitment, it was a good time for him to make that decision. So we actually opened the recruitment knowing we would, instead of the 4 positions, that we would be looking to fill 5. And it looks like, Tom, did you have a question or did that answer it?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I hate to see him go. I don't want him to go. But the way it is.
I will pass that on him. I told him, as his schedule allows, he should just pop in to say hi to everybody because you all would miss him. So I will be sure to pass on that you all expressed that you will miss his many contributions.
All right, well, thank you, Eliza, for bringing us the sad news, and thanks everyone for your kind words, which I echo. Alex's contributions have been just really very much appreciated and very valuable, and very pleased he's able to stay on the recruitment subcommittee to kind of serve out his term in that way. Are there any public comments, requests for Eliza or Amy that you have received ahead of time?
None.
Okay. I am not seeing any raised hands in the participant list as a member of the public who may wish to speak. So let's move on and take a look at 3 sets of minutes. The February 22nd recruitment subcommittee minutes for those folks that were on that committee, and then 2 sets of our board meeting minutes from March, the 1st and the 17th. So are there any corrections or additions or any omissions from those minutes that you noticed that you'd like to have addressed? Karen Spencer and then Tom Lipton.
I have one very small one. I believe it's on the March 1st one. I suspect the CBO analyst is at times SAD, S-A-D, but I saw one slight typo and it should be said. That was all that I saw. I appreciate, Eliza, you doing the notes, and I love the new format, by the way.
Thanks, Karen.
That's a good catch. That's kind of funny.
Tom Lipton, do you have any notes about people's emotions when they're delivering budget information?
No, I just wanted to say that looking at the February 22nd minutes from the committee's meeting, I was really impressed at the depth that I could tell that they're going in their discussions to try and make the recruitment as valuable as possible. So I just wanted to mention that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for taking a look at those minutes and catching typos. And with that small correction, the minutes stand as the record of those 3 meetings. Thanks so much. Okay, so thank you, Tom Lipton and Karen Williams. And a huge thank you to Amy Archer Masters for compiling pages and pages of ideas and thoughts and comments into a very nicely flowing, organized, and comprehensive budget letter for your all final approval today. So I think Amy's going to walk us through that letter, and speak now or forever hold your peace on any changes you would like to see to that letter. Take it away, Amy.
All right, so I am pulling up the actual letter so that we can just walk through the actual document. So I did not receive any actual edits between the time that I sent it on Thursday and today, other than from a couple folks who were not able to make it today, who said that they did not have any edits. So we're fine with the way that it was written. So for those of you who are here today, let's just kind of go page by page, and please just raise your hand and flag any sections as we go. And if there's a section that requires any specific edits, or you want some discussion with the full pub, then let's flag that now. And as Karen said, the goal is for us to finalize this today so that it can be delivered to council before the mayor is making his proposed decisions in the next couple of weeks. So let's just start with this first page and the introductory section that kind of summarizes the overall introduction and the requested budget. So does anybody have anything on this first page?
Not seeing any hands raised, Amy.
Right. I will move on to the section on rates, affordability, financial assistance, and equitable debt recovery. Karen Spencer.
I had on this page just one small, another nit. I guess I'm nitpicking today. So it is on the first paragraph where it says, now the war in Ukraine. I would prefer it if it said something like, and the expected economic impacts of the war in Ukraine. And maybe add sanctions or Russian sanctions or whatever, because I think that's what's gonna really hurt folks in the sense of the pocketbook.
Karen Spencer, did you want the adjective expected, like the expected economic impacts, or did you want it like?
I'm okay as it is. Otherwise, the sentence was going to get long and unwieldy, so that's fine. And you could even leave the now.
Objections to that
way it's
edit
phrased.
or general support for that? I'm assuming silence as general agreement. I see some thumbs up. Excellent. Okay. All right, several thumbs up. Thank you. Any other comments or hands raised on this affordability, financial assistance, equitable debt recovery section on page 2? I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Not sure if people are reading actively on the screen, so I'll go a little bit slow. Okay, moving to the next page, the end of this section. And on to the mayor's housing and houseless service priority area. Anybody with comments on that section? Julia.
Julia, did you have a comment, or was that a mistaken hand raise?
I was speaking, while muted, so that was special. It was under the support for alternative funding sources and models. The second to last sentence, this is just like a simple typo thing. Since the first round, the Bureau's estimate customer need, in addition, customers needs to be plural. Oh, wait, like maybe that, yeah, that it should be customers. I mean, that's the only, they kind of showed up when I was reading it in Google,
Yes.
but that's it.
All right. Thank you, Julia. Karen.
No, I don't have a specific comment on the mayor's housing section. I thought that was well written. My only comment would be, should that be the second thing, or should we talk about the capital issues next and then mayor's housing?
Let's see, again, helpful if people are supportive of that, either a verbal sounds good or a thumbs up. And it looks like Tom has a comment in response to that. Go ahead, Tom.
I'm wondering why shift them. I'm thinking of different reasons, and I'm just wondering why, Karen, you're suggesting that we change the order. Are we doing this in a what would be assumed a hierarchical way, or a prioritization of first is more of a priority than last? Just kind of wondering what you're thinking.
The reason was not so much in priority order, but just in impact on the budget. Since the infrastructure is $30 billion, it seems sort of misplaced or disjointed to have it kind of in the sandwich between the other two priorities.
This is Tom Lipton again. I'm okay with it either way. So whatever everybody wants to do.
Okay, thanks, Karen, for the suggestion and the clarification, and thanks, Tom, for the question. And again, we will assume if there is not a hand raised to speak, that people are okay if we put the capital section next. Yeah, Kale. Let's see. Kaliska had a thumbs up. Kale, let's go ahead.
Okay, so I had a thought, where it says mayor's housing and outside service priority support for staff training and safety. So maybe I'm not familiar with houselet service priority areas. If that includes, maybe some diverse issues surrounding diversity and equity, when it comes to additional training. Rather than just say, hey, we need some additional training, be more specified. And I'd like to see that specification revolve around equity and diversity when it comes to working with the communities, the different communities in Portland.
So Kale, you're suggesting some language in this section right
Yes,
here?
yes.
That
includes
get specific about that it include equity training.
Yes.
Okay.
And Kale, this is Karen Williams. May I ask just for clarification and in the aid of getting the right words down here that reflect your thoughts there? Are you thinking
Okay,
training for Bureau staff who are interacting with houseless folks, residents in the community? Is that the kind of
yes, yes,
you're referring to?
yes, the frontline
Something
workers.
I'm just wondering, just a suggestion, Kale, since sometimes the word equity is, it gets used in a lot of ways and has different meanings for different folks. I wondered, if you wanted to have perhaps a more specific recommendation.
So additional training and equity and inclusion practices when working with the customers.
Julia, please go ahead.
I was just thinking, oh goodness, words are hard today. I was thinking perhaps adding trauma informed.
That's a great,
I realize that it's
Great
going
idea in
along with the
addition to-
houseless, population. That's like you're often dealing with people having an actual moment of trauma or history of it.
yes, I want it to be more specified and direct in those areas, because just simply additional training, I think is just too broad.
Teresa, please go ahead.
Hi, I think given that, equity trainings are usually mandatory, I think on top of trauma-informed de-escalation training might be one that gets overlooked a lot by city staff. Just like, what Karen said, equity is pretty broad, and usually there's like, for staff, you're required to take multiple equity trainings already. So something that's more specific is de-escalation and trauma-informed care. Yeah.
Sarah Messier, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone, Sarah Messier from the Portland Water Bureau. I am in support of this. I have a lot of friends that work at the Bureau that work out in the city, in the field. They have to collect water samples from water sampling stations that are next to camps. There are some safety issues. There's been some folks that have actually been hurt by folks while they're working on the field. And I know that many of my friends have been asking our management for this type of training, specifically for our field workers who are out there every day, making sure that we are delivering clean and safe water. So I just want to specify in here that this training be for our actual field workers, because we're actually seeing some trainings being offered right now to office workers and managers who are returning to the Portland building, and that's being prioritized over our field workers who have been asking for this training for throughout COVID. So I just want to specify, so with that very long explanation, I think Amy in here, if we could specify training for people that work out in the field, and in both like, how to interact with houseless folks and with compassion, and also with some like safety-minded information for our field workers so that they remain safe while they're conducting their work. Thank you.
Amy Chomowitz.
Hi, Amy Chomowitz, BES, ex officio member. And I just wonder if we want to have the training about people who are experiencing houselessness, or, sorry, I'm not saying that the right way. Anyway, or is the training about effective communication with people who are experiencing some kind of a crisis? And the crisis could include houselessness, but there's a whole range of other things that people in the community could be experiencing that our staff may interact with. So I don't, let me see if I can come up with some language in here. Training field staff. So I guess it's the last part where it says will respond effectively to the ongoing houselessness crisis. And maybe it's more about receiving training for effective communication with community members who are experiencing a crisis.
I'm sorry, Amy, can you repeat that? So are you suggesting changing the end here?
Right, so respond effectively to community members who may be experiencing a crisis. And if we want to add, if we want to keep houselessness in this, we could say, comma, for example, maybe experiencing houselessness.
I'm sorry, I didn't see if Tom or Kale came next. So
I'll let Kale go first.
Okay, Kale and then Tom.
Okay, I'll be real quick. I just wanted to point out that I agree with Amy that maybe we don't have to include houselessness. I think the pandemic has created lots of different crises. And so I think there should be some help or with helping people understand impacts, how crisis, their, not just financial situation, but just in all situations. So we may not need to include houselessness and just leave it at crisis since we're looking at areas of training anyways.
And before we go to Tom, this is Karen Williams, and I did want to, I guess, remind folks that this comment is in response to specifically the mayor's priority area, and it's related to that. So I'm totally in support of the additional fine points that we're putting on this and being more inclusive and expansive, but because I would just advocate for keeping some tie to the mayor's priority area on houseless services. And Tom, please go ahead.
Thank you. This reminds me of when I used to work at Environmental Services, and some colleagues and I were in the field. We were office workers in the field, and we came upon a situation where there were several people that were fighting each other in a stormwater facility. And one of the guys hit one of the other guys with a 2x4 and split his head open, and they all took off running, and we stayed there and we tried to help the guy. And what I'm getting at is that it was a very traumatic experience for all of us to try and help the guy and get the other guys out of there and stuff like that. And I'm thinking now, man, I wish I had had some training. And I think my other colleagues would have liked it too. So I do think people in the field should get priority for training, but I think everybody during these times, and this was 2010. So it's before the pandemic and before lots of things going on. So I think in general that people at the city that are interacting with the public across the board need more training like you guys are talking about. All these things, these types of things are really needed, including crime training. You know, what do you do when you when you come upon a crime taking place, et cetera, things like that. So I think this is really important and is really valuable, I think.
Okay, so I heard kind of general support initially for removing houselessness, but then suggestion that it could be left in. And I heard Karen suggest leaving it in, and it sounded like people were okay with leaving it in as long as it was still kind of had this more general connection to a broader crises. So I'm seeing some thumbs up about that. Are people comfortable with the way this is written? Are there any further edits or objections before we move on?
I guess what I was trying to say is that, and I don't know the words to put this in there, and maybe it's already covered. So if somebody could say, is it covered that a crisis such as the type of crisis that I ran into as an employee in the field on my job, how is that covered in the language that has been proposed here? And if it's not, is there some way to put something in there that includes helping people that are experiencing some kind of crime or mental illness or something like that? Or, in other words, I think all of these issues are important. Have we got them all in here in some way? And I'm feeling kind of emotional about having this flashback to this thing. But so I'm wondering, does everybody feel that we've got that covered, or do people agree that those types of issues should be covered?
Amy Chomowitz, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. I do appreciate your sharing that story. I do think that what we have here is covering the kind of training that might have helped you in that situation. I think with the addition of de-escalation and trauma-informed care training, and that we've broadened it a little bit. So it's training to communicate with community members who are in a crisis. I do think that those are broad enough, but at the same time, they are focused on just exactly the kind of situation that you and your coworkers found yourselves in.
Thank you. I agree. That's good.
Not seeing other hands. Amy, is that still a remnant hand, or did you have something more to add?
No, my apologies.
No, okay, still a remnant.
The office.
Right. Okay.
Things aren't working that well.
Kale, go ahead.
I had a quick thought, and this is just and asked to bring up. I know that the letter is focused on like for customers and outside people, but maybe if we can we add like an inclusion or recommended inclusion that there be training for staff that includes self-care, kind of like what Tom had mentioned. So include, so like maybe in addition, we recommend that there be training for self-care training for staff members, so they can better so they can better care for themselves. It's just a thought. If you don't think it's appropriate, then that's fine too. But I think there should be some internalized training for staff.
Kaliska?
I guess I don't have a problem with self-care. I just don't know if it necessarily belongs here. right? Because we're talking specifically to the mayor's housing and houseless service. So if we're talking self-care, do you mean specific to if they experience something like Tom did? Or I don't know that it necessarily belongs in this because we are talking specifically to in response to the mayor's. So I don't.
And then it's just understanding that, like I said, it's more like in addition that, that we recommend, because, when working with, and folks with crisis, there's some internalized trauma that gets, exposed and that gets brought up that each person experiences. And, I think it's important to recognize that and to provide, maybe strategies and tactics to help alleviate some of these what do you call triggers that workers might encounter.
So are you talking specific to the people that the workers encounter, like self-care for the people?
Self-care for our staff that is working with people that runs into triggering situations that they can internalize themselves.
Sarah Messier, do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, so as a staff member, I definitely hear you, Kale. Self-care is something that is super important for us as staff, and is something that the bureaus definitely are currently contending with throughout the pandemic. I do want to also highlight that as city staff, we have access to like counseling services and all sorts of wellness services and things like that. So instead of adding a training, I would actually, and I don't know if it needs to be added here, but just to address what you were just saying, I would recommend that instead of a self-care training, it's more of that the bureaus more widely encourage staff to take advantage of our employee benefits and wellness services that we get as city staff. So I don't know if it needs to be written in here or not, but I think instead of adding more training, which already as staff, like there's a lot of trainings that we want, I would just reference resources that we already have available to us.
Yeah, I would, I think that's a great idea too. So it doesn't necessarily have to be maybe making outreach, doing outreach outreach and promoting some of the resources that is already there. Folks may not be aware of or maybe reluctant to access. So just messaging that, I think would be. But I don't know what that, how you can put that into words. And as I said, it may not belong in this area, it may not belong at all. But I think it's something worth mentioning.
So this is Karen Williams. Let me take a shot at it, and then we'll go to Julia has a comment, perhaps a suggestion. So what I'm hearing is that we would not include that self-care in the list of training as it's currently been added, but rather add a final sentence that says something like, in addition, we encourage council to, make wellness resources for staff, to encourage them to publicize wellness resources for staff who are, currently experiencing these kinds of difficult situations. Amy will, I'm sure, come up with much more beautiful and eloquent words. Amy Archer-Masters. Let's go Julia and then Amy Chomowitz.
I was really going to say essentially what she suggested, which was, assuming that the city has counseling and other resources available to folks who have experienced a triggering or traumatic event at work, that they are encouraged to seek those out and that they know those resources are available. So yeah, and whatever sentence we can come up with that lists that, I think it does, I'm with Kale, it does make sense to list that in this section because they kind of do fit hand in glove there, right? You know, that they need to be trained, but they also need to have resources or know that they have resources there for them if they do have a difficult experience. So yeah, I like the idea of having that sentence in there.
Amy Chalmowitz, did you still have something to add here, or did that address what you were going to say?
No, I think we can move on. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for that very robust and thoughtful discussion in support of our city workers. That's very gratifying. Anything else before we move on to the next page? Okay.
All right, moving on to the infrastructure investments and capital projects section. Hands raised. So moving on to the support for community engagement investment section. Racial equity and workforce development section, Tom Lipton.
I just wanted to make a comment about this section before this, the capital section, and something that struck me in going through this in working on the letter with you guys, and then thinking about how the bureaus work. It's extreme, I think, unless I'm wrong, that it's extremely difficult for us where we sit here to know what goes on in the various meetings and discussions within the bureaus as they tackle these enormous expenses relative to the infrastructure, and we made various comments about trying to balance balance the allocation of money toward the repair and upkeep of the infrastructure. And I'm just bringing it up because I hope that maybe in the course of the next year, before we get to the next budget, that we find a way to somehow tap into the Bureau's information that would help us understand how they came to their conclusions. Because as we talk about this another aspect of equity, looking at who's paying now, who's going to be burdened with future costs, and how do we make that as equitable as possible for current and future ratepayers and stuff. It's hard to really know how that balance can be done, because we are not making those decisions. Those decisions are coming out of the bureaus, hopefully with as much input from the commissioner's office as possible, but they still, within them, they're making decisions that relate to their particular perspectives. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't have any changes to make to this, but I just thought that it's something that I hope we can kind of explore that and see how we might be able to try and get more information about how decisions, and just to give you an example, if this seems a little bit abstract, the Capitol Highway project is one that is, it's in the BES, well, BES and Water Bureau are putting money into it. The Capitol Highway Improvement Project is being paid by the different bureaus. So BES is doing stormwater and sewer, et cetera. There's a project that was in Southeast that was done, and it's called an LID, Local Improvement District. So it was an improvement to streets and stormwater and water and sewer. And the property owners on the streets had to pay for those improvements. But on Capitol Highway, they don't have to pay for those improvements. So I don't know, and I suspect many of us on this board don't know why the difference. Why is it that in some particular locations, the property owners have to pay for improvements, and in other types of locations, they don't have to pay anything? So my impression from checking on this actually about a year ago was that the property owners on Capitol Highway didn't have to pay anything. So to me, that is confusing. It's like, I don't get it. So anyway, I just wanted to bring it up because we're on that subject. And again, I don't have any changes to make, but I just wanted to bring it up to everybody on the board to see if, just to put it out there, and hopefully we can explore that in the future. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to keep moving us forward so that we can make it through the letter. So racial equity section. Not seeing any hands raised. So transparency, coordination, and communication section. And the closing. Tom.
Hi, I just had one typo, not typo, but one edit on this. I'd like to suggest that in the first sentence on next steps, it would say board, and we look forward to collaborating on the issues identified in this letter rather than qualifying them as policy issues. So to delete the word policy.
Any objections to that?
Tom, would you like to just say how come?
Well, I want to make sure that if we have things that are not policy issues, that this does not exclude them, because we've categorized it as policy issues. If everything in this letter is policy, then there's no issue with that. But
Okay.
I'm not able to go through and understand for sure that one thing is policy or not, as it relates to what might have been overlooked. So it's just trying to not exclude something unintentionally.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think the qualifier is crucial. Okay, well, that fantastic. Thank you all for final suggestions, edits, comments. So in summary, in addition to some track changes that have been projected on the screen, we're going to shift the capital, few paragraphs related to capital projects. We're going to move them up above, or I should say before, getting into the houseless service priority area comments. And with that, I would say that a motion would be in order to have staff finalize this letter and send it on to council. Is there such a motion? Karen Spencer, is that a hand for a motion or a comment?
It is a hand for a motion, and so I move that to request that staff finalize the letter and send it off to city council.
Is
This
there a
is
second?
Julia. I second that.
Was that Julia?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Karen and Julia. Is there further discussion among board members on this topic, on the motion? And is there any public comment? Seeing neither, we will proceed with a vote. Karen Williams, Pub Co-Chair, voting yes. On to Kaliska.
Kaliska Day, Pub Co-Chair, I vote yes. Kale, I think it's to you.
Oh, I'm 3 this time. This is Kale, and I vote yes.
This is Robin, voting member. I vote yes.
This is Julia. I vote yes.
This is Tom Lipton. I vote yes.
This is Teresa. I vote yes.
And Jasmine, are you there?
Yes, sorry. I'm trying to mute myself. This is Jasmine Varela. I vote yes.
This is Karen Spencer. I vote yes.
That's everyone with our 2 excused members. Alex and Gabby are not with us today. So the motion passes. Thanks all for your work, and thank you staff for all your amazing support in getting that letter pulled together and finalized and sent off. Really appreciate it. Okay, so our next item, I believe we are going to do a little off agenda order, and our new liaison with Commissioner Mapp's office, I believe, was able to join us. So we might be able to say hello to Goldan Salazar. Are you there, Goldan?
Hello everyone.
Introduce
Hi.
yourself. Hello.
I'm so sorry that I'm late. I for some reason inadvertently had this at 4 o'clock on my calendar. So thank you so much for having me on the agenda, and I appreciate joining your meeting today. So yeah, I am Michelle Rodriguez. The former liaison is still in our office. I'm just taking some work off her plate so that she can focus on BES. And so, yeah, I'm going to be the liaison for the Water Bureau, and I will be attending these meetings more regularly just to kind of get a better understanding about what you all are concerned about and what your discussion topics are. And if you need anything, you can always feel free to contact me. And yeah, thanks so much for letting me introduce myself today.
Well, thank you for taking the time to come and introduce yourself to us, Goldan. We look forward to working with you, and no worries about there is no late when one when one appears at a meeting. It's just the right time for one to appear. So no worries at all. We're pretty darn flexible here around this table. So
thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see. So I am going to turn this over to Amy to talk about late breaking news, and that is the spring budget bump and a couple of items of import related to that. So Amy, could you walk us through this issue?
Thank you, Karen. This is Amy, and I will try to be pretty brief so that we still have time for the next agenda item, but I did want to share some information. So as you all know, there are 2 times of year where we have budget monitoring. We do that in fall and in spring, and the pub does not typically spend a lot of time on the budget monitoring because the bulk of what the utility bureaus are doing during those budget monitoring processes, the bureaus do a lot in them, but a lot of it is very technical. So it's a lot of budget adjustments that they do to make sure that all of their funds are balancing, and they're moving money based on where they're spending it and how their capital projects are moving forward, et cetera. And so it's a lot of technical adjustments, and it's just not a lot for the pub to comment on. And so the spring budget monitoring process that the bureaus submitted. The city budget office got their analyses out late last night, and council had a work session just this morning. And there were just two key items that were not technical items that I just wanted to flag for you so that they weren't surprising if decisions end up being made that end up impacting the bureaus, and in case there was any interest from PUB in any sort of advocacy with council as they make decisions. So they had a work session this morning, and then the final bump hearing is next Wednesday. And those two items are in these first bullets on the screen. The first one, the BES $374,000, the Bureau, I think, just found out about it at the end of last week. And it is for some groundwater issues that are happening at Providence Park. And I guess with some investigations that were done by some folks there, they suspect that some of the cause of those groundwater issues may be related to some work that was done by some sewer relining by BES and some permitted work by the Bureau of Development Services. I'm not sure because I don't have the details on that investigation work. And that is under review with the city attorney's office, but the city budget office, instead of it being funded by general fund dollars, which is what the Office of Management and Finance was requesting, the city budget office is recommending that BES pay for half of it and the Bureau of Development Services fund the other half of these repairs that are required to address the groundwater issue. So obviously that would have impact on BES's budget. So the city attorney is reviewing it to identify whether it's an appropriate use of ratepayer dollars, and as to whether it truly, I assume one of the things they're looking at is whether there is a direct connection to the work that was done by BES and the cause of the groundwater issue. So that's one issue that I think the decision will be made based on what the findings are of the city attorney's office. And so that will go back to council, presumably next week when it goes forward with the spring bump. The other one that is more of a kind of policy question for council is this other item, which is the 1.2 million for Water Bureau and just over 200,000 for BES. And these are, the bureaus were requesting general fund dollars to support the increase in personnel expenses that resulted from the labor agreement, the collective bargaining agreement, and the increased expenses as a result of that agreement that were not budgeted. And typically personnel expenses would be absorbed by the same funding source. So since the utilities are funded by rates, then the presumption would be that rates should also fund any increase to the personnel expenses as well. Obviously, circumstances are unique this year with this agreement coming late in the year and these being unbudgeted expenses. So the bureaus have requested general fund dollars for this. The city budget office and the mayor are proposing that the general fund not provide those dollars. And so if the general fund does not provide funding for that increased expense, then that could have impact on rates or require some sort of internal, service alignment or changes within the bureaus in order to accommodate that increased expense. Since this is happening so late in the year, it's obviously something that's more challenging to address this late in the year. You can't address it as easily as if something was identified early in the year and you could hold vacancies or, adjust some of your spending in order to address some of those expenses. But late in the year, that's more challenging to do. So Anyway, I wanted to flag those issues for you. If there's questions, the Bureau of Finance folks are in the meeting here today as well. But I just wanted to flag that for you because that is any decisions that are made about the current budget year obviously have impacts on next year's budget, because if there's a decision that's made to this year that impacts their end of year balances, then it may impact next year's rates in order to deal with some of the impacts to this year's end of year balances. So that's the reason why this becomes relevant at the end of the year. So I just wanted to flag those issues for you all because it's kind of short turnaround time and late in the year that spring bump happens. And it's kind of a short window as an opportunity for PUB if you do want to make comment before council. It is something that you could choose to do either formally or informally in writing, or by individually, or by giving testimony before council at the hearing, if that's something that's a possibility.
Okay, thanks for the overview, Amy, and the great detail. Can I just clarify the opportunities for PUB to opine on this if we choose to do that? So the hearing is on the 13th, and that is before our next meeting by a day, I believe. And can you say what the timing is for talking points for mayor if invited, April? And is the rate hearing you're referring to, is that the April 13th, or is that a different?
No, sorry. So when I had originally pulled this together, I was pulling together for future opportunities for PUB's input. And so this is, it's been on our slides previously. So these are for the requested budget or for next year's budget. In most years, the mayor will invite some representatives of PUB to a meeting with the mayor's office. Last year, it did not happen. So I'm not positive whether his schedule will accommodate it this year. I haven't heard, but it's a possibility. And so if invited, there may be an opportunity that would take place. Typically, those talking points end up being pretty similar to a lot of the content that ends up in both your verbal talking points at the work session and the written letter. So it's pretty consistent. The content that you're talking about is still pretty similar content to what you've been talking about in meetings. They're just tailored to the audience, and it's more conversational with the mayor because it's an open meeting room, and so he asks questions, and so depending on who's in the room, it's more conversational. The rate hearing takes place in May, so that you have more information by then, because you'll know what the mayor has proposed in the mayor's proposed budget, what decisions have been made both in the spring bump, what he has proposed in the proposed budget, and how things are starting to shape out for next year's budget. And so you may have a sense of, if there's specific points that you've made in some of the written documents or some of your recommendations that you want to focus on, or new information that's come out, you may be able to tailor those talking points even further. In some years, the PUB has opted not to, take additional opportunity because there's not necessarily something new to say and you've already said what you've wanted to say. So it really depends year to year whether there's something that you want to say additionally, whether you just want to reinforce what's already been said, or whether you really want to focus on a particular area. It kind of depends on what you know by that point.
Okay, yes, so thanks, Amy. I'm sorry, this is Karen Williams again. I didn't mean to get us off track there. I just, so let's go back to the current spring bump and the 2 items that you walked us through. So to understand then really our only opportunity to express an opinion on those 2 items is at the hearing on April 13th, which
Yes.
takes place the day before our next meeting. So with that, I am, I see your hand, Tom. Let me just finish my sentence here. So I think that these are really for practical purposes being invited or being offered as informational items. And if anyone feels strongly that you think PUB should or you would like us to put together some opinions on these 2 items that are in the spring bump, and we'd like council to know what we think about that, this would be the time to express that. Tom, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Karen. And whenever you see my hand, don't rush. Please take your time. I just want to ask, can we get more information about these? Because I'm actually trying to understand the BES thing, and I'm not sure that, well, I don't fully understand it. So why would I even be able to make any kind of comment about it? So is there more information, Amy, that you can send to us? So, and of course, we're not going to have time before the next meeting. So I guess if you sent me something about that first item, I would look at it. And then if I had something I could just, if it's possible to attend as a citizen or something, I could do that if I felt there was anything to say. And then the one on the second bullet, is this saying that BES and Water Bureau want the money to come out of the general fund? Or is that what this is saying, that here's this amount of money request for general fund primarily to support the expenses? And I just am confused about that. Why would BES and Water Bureau expect money to come out of the general fund for paying their employees for whatever the agreement is with DCTU? So number one, can you get more information to us regarding the first bullet about BES? And then the second one, am I reading that correctly, that Water Bureau and BES want the additional funds coming out of general fund?
In response to your first question, yes, I can try to get some more information. I think that it's pretty detailed, and I suspect that the determination will be something that will be a legal one. And so it's under city attorney's review. And so that one, I think probably once a legal finding is made, then there will be more information to be known about it. So, I think that's really the next step for us to get some more information. For the second one is probably more the one that I think is the place for if PUB has an interest in having an opinion, because exactly for the reason that you asked the question, because it is different to be asking for general fund dollars because it is a unique year. So typically the bureaus would pay for their personal expenses with rate dollars. This was an unanticipated expense, and so the bargaining happened late in the year. It's unbudgeted, and so in absence of general fund dollars, it would mean that rates would need to be increased in order to manage that additional expense in this year. And so the bureaus have requested the general fund as this one-time stopgap given the circumstances this year. That's what council is considering. So that's the question before council, and that they're going to be considering. Yeah. And I think that, and the information that I can share with you, I'll be sending the information that came out in the analyses from the city budget office late last night. We didn't send before the meeting today, but it will go out to you after the meeting today. And there is some good analysis on the BES request from the analyst that is assigned to the, that did the analysis of that request, as well as both the Water Bureau and the Environmental Services ones for the general fund requests as well. The analysts for BES has identified that that BES, should be able to manage the additional expense without having service impacts, but the Water Bureau, because of the size and the other financial circumstances as a result of revenue collections and personnel expenses, et cetera, that has a more significant impact this year. And so would require either a rate increase or service impacts in order to accommodate that size of impact this year. Christopher, yeah.
I just had a question because pretty much from my understanding in the past, BES and water have always done the, they've budgeted assuming that we were going to get the things that we got this time around. Is this just because of the $3,000 bonus we're getting? Is that something we can find out if that's where it's coming from? And why is there such a big difference between what BES is wanting, 216,000 versus 1.2 million from Water Bureau?
The bulk of it is the $3,000 bonus, and the size difference is primarily because of, I believe, the number of represented staff in those categories, and the impacts to the bureaus are different based on the number of represented staff that they have that result in that bonus. There is some additional, but the bulk of it is that 3,000 bonus.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, Karen Williams here. So thanks again for the overview, Amy, folks, for your questions. Are we ready to move on? Is there anything else, either questions or statements that folks would like to make about these two spring bump items? Okay.
Hey, this is Kale. I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Kale.
So regarding the first one, I definitely agree with Tom that we need a little more information. Do we have any recommendations from the city attorney's office as to the reimbursement, the 50% cost to reimburse? And also, so two questions. We had agreed to give pay raises with money that we didn't have. That was, what can we get a little more detail about what happened there?
We're waiting for information on city attorney's office. They're working on it. So we don't have the information yet on that. And the other is part of the collective bargaining process.
Okay, and with that collective bargaining process, do we have a, I assume we don't have a surplus or a kind of a fund balance, like a reserve or something like that when we're doing budgets, when things come up. But I mean, I guess it wouldn't even be a question if we don't have the money. I mean, we agreed to pay for personnel expenses. Although I like to kind of what are some of these personal expenses that are causing us to kind of go over budget. But I mean, it seems pretty straightforward regardless, because we got to get the money from somewhere, and if we don't have it, I'd rather see that we get it from the general fund than from the customers, because I'd hate to give the impression that we agreed to something and made customers pay for what we agreed to, passing on the expenses to of a problem. I definitely wouldn't like to have that represented.
You'll see in the documents that I send that the budget office analysis is stating that the Bureau of Environmental Services personnel expenses can absorb the $216,000, but the Water Bureau cannot. And so there is not enough cushion in personnel to absorb the size of the impact as a result of the bargaining, because it wasn't budgeted, it wasn't anticipated at the level of what was negotiated. But that is not uncommon as a result of bargaining process. It's unknown when you go into bargaining what the personnel impact is going to be on your budget. So you can project some of it, but yeah, not all.
I mean, I don't know, $1.2 million off. But I'd also like to see, like, what are some proposals if we have to cut programs or something like that, what they would look like. Because I mean, definitely we should weigh out and what the impact is, because I mean, if we can't make it this year, how are we going to make it next year? And so at the end of the day, we would just be passing on the costs of passing on the costs that we agreed to for a bargaining contract, rather than trying to fit it in the budget. It doesn't sound like it's sustainable.
All right, thanks, Kale. I'm going to go to Sarah and Robin next, but I just want to interject with, sorry, I'm just glancing at a note here. Okay, so we're winding down here in time, so I just want to put an option out for folks. It sounds like on this topic, we may in fact have a recommendation or a statement that we would like to make, especially around the Portland Water Bureau. Well, anyway, the personnel expenses related to collective bargaining. So with that, we also had we were going to have a quick update on the overview of the rate study that BES is currently here to present. So I want to hear from the group. Do we want to, we have some options. We can keep going with this conversation and come up with some kind of a statement we want to make about the spring bump. We can have the BES presentation and then stay on for another 10 minutes or so that we can finish our conversation about the spring bump. I guess those are the two options that I see. So think about that for a second, and I'll go to Sarah and then Robin.
Hey all, Sarah Messier from the Portland Water Bureau. I just wanted to speak to a little bit about sort of timing of things. So the collective bargaining, just as a reminder, was the process that led to the potential strike that DCTU was getting ready, had announced for, I think that was going to happen in February. And so, when that was happening, this board, folks on this board did express interest in supporting workers. And so, as part of that collective bargaining process, again, which was leading up to this potential strike, these funds for the raises and the COLAs, or the cost of living adjustments, are what was negotiated through that process and what the workers were able to achieve through that negotiation process. And a bit of perspective. So the the Water Bureau, I know at the Water Bureau, like we start our budget process like I think the saying is like we work on it 13 months out of the year. So, the budget process really starts for us as soon as we get a new our budget out. We're already starting on the next fiscal year. So it's something that is when it comes in February or March, it really is kind of late in the game. So I just wanted to put that information out there for the board to have that as sort of a perspective.
Thank you very much, Sarah Messier. Robin Castro, please go ahead.
Yeah, just in this conversation, I was definitely thinking that we should maybe as a group or individually try to write something in support. I was thinking that I think it makes sense as a bureau or not as a board to maybe reject BES's request because they have the capacity within their current budget to pay for the increased labor costs that come from collective bargaining. And so the issue with the issue with Portland Water Bureau is that this year's budget doesn't have that money. And so yes, next year we would have to be looking at a rate increase possibly. But that is the cost of paying your workers a living wage essentially. And so that's part of the expectation essentially. And so for my personal view on this is that I think that we as a board should support Portland Water Bureau's request, maybe reject BES's because they have the capacity to absorb it. And then also be mindful that maybe even though budget or rate increases are contentious issues, we are all workers. And so even though I'm a low income worker, I do feel that I would be in support of a rate increase if it specifically meant that the workers at the two bureaus are paid living wages, which is what the increase, that $1 million ask is for. It's literally for paychecks to workers. And that's my viewpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, so I have, let's see, I've just put a question to Eliza to ask if the BES folks could stick around for about 10 to 15 minutes after 5. So I'm waiting to hear back on that.
Amy has indicated, I think we've been communicating between the two of us with both Ken and Anthony. And I got the message from Ken that they could stay if the board is interested in staying. I'm also not certain how time sensitive this particular presentation is.
Okay, fair point. I just want to respect people's time and the fact that they showed up to provide some information to the board that actually we had asked for. So yeah.
Anthony confirms he can stay till 5:15 and and so, yeah, so if the board members are willing to, he's also saying it would be good to get the presentation forward to you all. And so, yep.
Terrific. Thanks for doing that back channel work, Eliza and Amy, and thanks to our BES staff for being able to stick around. So the next question is, can board members, or at least a quorum of board members, can we extend our meeting to 5:15? Because I think we can wrap up this item and still have the BES rate study. So I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. I'm not seeing any. Tom, does your hand raised mean yes, you could stick around, or do you have a comment to make?
Well, I can stick around, but I also don't want to put BES staff in a position of having to rush through something. And if anybody has any burning questions, and there isn't time to actually talk about it, it seems we would, I mean, I hate for them to be here all this time and then not be able to do it, but I don't want to put them under under this time constraint that for all of us. So I'm just suggesting that perhaps, unless they feel it's real easy to go through it in a couple minutes and then take questions, I'm just thinking we're not really giving them the time they deserve to give it to us. So But if they're into for it, I am too. So just wanted to say that.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think it was sort of a 10-ish minute presentation and planning on having some questions at the end from us that would probably be information that we would get, at a future meeting. So in that sense, I don't think it's super time sensitive, but one of the lead staff person, as I understand, is not available at our 21st meeting. So it would be kind of nice if we can at least see the presentation today, figuring we may have follow-up questions.
And I'll add, this is Eliza, that they had intended to make it a very short presentation and actually had asked pub staff to collect your all's questions even after the meeting. And so they weren't planning to do Q&A, and just this was sort of to kick off what we know is going to be a series of conversations throughout the coming year.
Okay. So with that, sorry, let's go back one
do
more slide and see, do we want to make any kind of recommendation or decisions regarding the specifically the Portland Water Bureau and the BES request for general fund to support personnel expenses from bargaining? I actually believe I heard two different potential recommendations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I heard Kale recommend that we would support a general fund request to minimize impact on rates and potential, And Robin, I heard your request, or not request, but potential recommendation is to either not support BES's request or perhaps remain silent on BES request for general fund, but to recommend support for Portland Water Bureau's ask for general fund. But if they don't get that we would also support using rate money to fund the expenses related to bargaining. Did I what I heard was two potentially different recommendations. So that being said, can we come to a good middle ground? Would anyone like to make a motion? Would anyone like to clarify their recommendation? Or reword it from the muddled job I probably did?
Well, I think you got my point right. I definitely am opposed to having a practice where we misbudget what we can agree to and what we can afford as an organization, and we pass that on to customers, consumers. I think it needs to fit in the budget somehow. And definitely I support paying our workers and making sure that they're compensated right. But I think we need to figure out how we can do that without passing on the cost, because I can't see, I definitely don't want it to be where every time there's a bargaining, we agree to something, and then that means every customer pays a little bit more based on what we agreed to. So I definitely don't like us to see a rate increases like that.
So, okay, thanks, Kale, for stating your concerns. Let me go to Jasmine, if that's okay, Robin, because Jasmine hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, hi, this is Jasmine. That's so we were bargaining for over 2 years. And unfortunately, when we started bargaining, we did not start off with wages. So when we finally came to the end and we went over wages and our cost of living that we still didn't receive, that should have been received over a year ago, that is where all this comes from. So if the Water Bureau had already put in their budget, that's kind of hard for them to then say, well, that they don't have it. And so as all the unions, we're trying to get our workers some more money. And until we can come to agreement with the city, I can't really fault the Bureau on that. That there's no way for them to actually budget for it, depending on what the asks are of the people in the Bureau or each union. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Desmond, for that clarification. And that's why, I say, hey, if this is one of those situations, I think the general fund can step in and help meet that. But going forward, we would plan it into, so it's not something that, that happens, going forward.
Robin, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, we don't necessarily, with my motion to support the Portland Water Bureau's ask for the general fund request, but not the BES, we don't necessarily have to include the further recommendation that we then support or do not support a rate increase. We can just say that we support something now, and then if it comes to it, we can have the conversation of adding if we care about increasing the rate itself. But I just wanted to clarify that my motion was specifically to support the Portland Water Bureau's general fund request and deny the Bureau of Environmental Services just based on their budget being able to actually having the capacity to absorb that extra $216,000 to pay for labor costs.
And I heard you phrase that as a motion, Robin. Was that your intention?
Yes, it is now.
There is a motion on the floor, and may I ask if Amy or Eliza would be so kind as to type that into the chat. Thank you. So let me just read the motion and we'll see if there's a second. The motion offered by Robin is to support the Portland Water Bureau's request for general fund, but not the BES request for general fund for DCTU personnel expenses. And that denial of BES is based on their ability and our understanding that they can absorb the expense within their existing budget. Okay, that is the motion. Is there a second for that motion? And I see Tom's hand raised, but I would just hold that thought, Tom. If there is a second, could someone just speak, just unmute and.
I will second the motion.
And Kale will second.
This is Kale.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so I see you lowered your hand. Tom, do you, I would next ask for discussion on the motion. Is the comment that you wanted to make appropriate for discussion of the motion?
Yes.
Please go ahead then.
So as this discussion is unfolding, I'm getting more confused. So somebody, Sarah, I think, or somebody said that these negotiations have been going on for 2 years. So I find it hard to support the request for general funds from the bureaus, because as the bureaus, both bureaus have to allocate money for unexpected circumstances. Pipes break, various things happen, and they have contingency funds. To me, with this going on for 2 years, I don't understand why, and they could look at what DCTU was asking for, and they could get an idea that if they're successful, they're going to have to come up with $1 million extra and things like that. So I don't understand why the two bureaus didn't have a contingency for this and are now asking for general funds. It just doesn't make sense to me that they would overlook something like this and be in this situation. So I think it just has to come out of the rates. And I want to go back to something that I think Kale said earlier, and that is, okay, this doesn't, and Kale, you may not have said it like this, but my impression was that this doesn't mean that because they need this extra money that we need to raise rates. We could have them look inside the budgets that they have and find ways to alter those budgets to cover this additional expense. So anyway, that's my feeling about it.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Are there any other discussion comments, or is there further discussion, I should say, on the motion that's on the floor? Kale, please go ahead.
So here's why I second and I agree with the motion to use the general fund. So what I heard was that because it went on for 2 years and because there wasn't a projected, I mean, I'm assuming that that's coming out wrong, because we didn't know how much to project and we had other expenses that are going that needed to pay at the time of agreement. We realized a shortfall that needed to be met. And based on my assumption that, you know, the Water Bureau has already looked at other programs and other alternatives to funding it, and it not being there, then they need to meet that shortfall somehow. And I've rather see it meet that shortfall from the general fund. I mean, the general fund pretty much comes from tax money. People already paid for it. And if we increase the rates, they'll be paying for it again. So why not request money from the general fund, cover that, and then balance the budget going forward? That is what I, expect is the plan going forward. And so that's why I supported it, and not looking back at hindsight, recognizing that hindsight's 2020. But this is where we are, and we need a solution, and people need to get paid. And I think the general fund would be the best option rather than getting the funds from consumers again.
So we've had a speaker in favor and a speaker against the motion. Are there further discussion on the motion?
This is Robin again. I do feel what Tom is saying, because I have a suspicion of, I generally think that city workers want, they're not misleading us, but I do have we are speaking of like the expectation of balancing a budget. But I still feel like I still support what I motioned, and then I support just what Kale said in support of that as well, even knowing that I'm a little suspicious as to why the bureaus, like, do they not want to pay for it, or is it that they don't have the money for it? Is it easier to ask for the general fund this year than it is to absorb $1 million in labor costs, but I think right now, if we are going to support this, because this hearing is within the next week or so, we either have to lean into, yes, we want this motion, or be very hesitant with what Tom is saying and being like, maybe we just don't know enough to actually say something in the next 7 days before this hearing comes. But I personally am still in support of the motion that I put down.
Okay, thank you, Robin. So I am seeing no further hands, that we are ready for a vote. So I will call the question. And on this issue, as chair, I am going to not vote unless my vote is needed for a tiebreaker. So if we
call for public comment.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Is there any public comment before we vote? Thanks for that reminder. Seeing no indication of public comment, let's go to Kaliska for the vote tally.
So is this a vote that we want to make a statement? Is that?
The motion is to express, so for PUB to express support for Portland Water Bureau's request for general fund, but to deny BES's request for general fund based on BES's ability to absorb the expense within their existing budget. And this is in reference to the increased personnel expenses related to collective bargaining. So it's a statement from the pub to city council, which of course city council can do with what they wish, but it is a statement from the pub.
I guess I kind of feel like where I'm with Tom, where I just feel like I just don't have necessarily enough information. So I think I just might vote no on making a statement this quickly.
Kale? How do you vote?
I will vote yes.
This is Robin. I vote yes.
This is Julia. I vote yes.
Sorry, this is Tom Lipton. I vote no.
This is Teresa. I vote yes.
Jasmine, you're up.
Nope. Sorry, this is Jasmine. I vote yes.
This is Karen. I sort of vacillated, but on the whole, I believe I am voting yes. I am voting yes on this one.
Oh, sorry, that was it, number 9. Thank you all. Motion passes. That is 6-2 with the chair abstaining. All right, thank you so much, you guys. Thanks for sticking around, talking that through and getting to a decision. I think good job. Yes.
This is Eliza, and I feel like probably given the time frame, does it make sense for a co-chair and or a pub staff just simply to send an email to city council on behalf of the board expressing this, your vote, your decision?
This is Karen and Karen Williams, and yeah, I think that sounds appropriate. Do any members object to staff sending a recommendation to council by email? Given the time is short. Terrific. Thank you, Eliza and Amy. Make it so. To our BES colleagues, thank you for sticking around. If you are still up for it, looks like a quorum of pub members is sticking around to hear your presentation, and we really appreciate your patience.
No worries, we're still here. Thanks for sticking around so late. We're really here today to just orient you to the draft report. We're going to hand over today as well. So there's going to be plenty of time for us in the coming months and the upcoming public outreach phase to really dive into the details. But we really want to just provide pub with the first public copy of the draft report, and it'll open up for future conversations. So Anthony Martin on my staff has been really the lead on this project. He came to us about 3 to 4 years ago from a consulting firm that really specializes in this type of work. So we're really lucky to have him. I don't want to steal much of his thunder. You'll notice that Anthony's very good at speaking the rate study lingo, but please know that this is a report from an outside consultant, the Ghilardi Rossing. I'll go ahead and work to Anthony.
Well, thank you all so much for your time, pub members. Really appreciate it. My name's Anthony Martin. I'm a financial analyst in BES, and we'll talk about the rate study report summary. So the first couple of slides are going to be kind of the why we did this, which is also chapter 1 of the report. So first piece is the rate study objectives really are to review our current methodologies for how we get revenue. This includes our rates, system development charges, and other fees. Additionally, since Clean River Rewards is not a thing we the BES gets rate revenue from, it still affects rates. So the consultant was tasked to review Clean River Awards discount program. The consultant then compared BES to industry benchmarks and best practices, and then provided options. So to be clear, anything presented here are options for consideration during the public outreach phase, which is the next phase in the rate study process. This also has to align with city and bureau priorities. So when looking at all of those revenue sources for BES, first, the goal is to get to cost of service principles. So the idea there is if a specific customer class or a ratepayer is creating costs, those costs should be recovered by that specific ratepayer. That's what the cost of service is. So making sure that we are collecting rates in a way that matches how we as a bureau need to spend our budget. Next up is the BES and city equity framework. We want to make super clear that equity is an important piece of this. And while rates are not the only or the best way to address equity, we play an important role in that. And then finally, aligning with our strategic plan, making sure that BES's path forward aligns with this rate study. Finally, affordability is a key point. While it's really about leveraging this rate study for broader conversations about affordability, as I will get to in the next slide, the low-income program is not directly related to this. So now that we've talked about what the rate study does, which is look at all the different revenue sources, how we collect them, that methodology, and suggest options for changing them, it's also important to note what this rate study does not do. One key piece is the first two bullets, really, which is revenue adequacy, overall rate increases, and our capital plan. So the way to think of this study is that we have a pie and we're trying to slice the pie in the correct way. The pie isn't growing or shrinking based on any options in this rate study. It stays the same size, but how we cut it, how we divide those costs up between different ratepayers is the key difference in the options presented. This report also doesn't address the low-income discount program. And customer outreach and engagement is going to be a separate phase, so with a different consultant leading that effort. So now that we have gotten through the kind of why, the next piece is really a how to read the rate study. That's the goal of today, is to talk about kind of this rate study is very long and contains a lot of incredibly technical information. It's over 220 pages, including appendices. And so what we've done as BES is to try and provide a little bit of a reader. So this PowerPoint can serve as a reference if there are key points you wanted to look at. Each slide that you will see calls out certain tables or sections in the report that tie closely to kind of a key piece of the analysis. And then finally, this report is over 200 pages long. It is very long. However, the executive summary is 20 pages, sizable in and of itself, but it is very comprehensive by itself. So there are a couple ways you can read this document, either just going through the executive summary as is, kind of using this PowerPoint as a reference when looking at the chapters. So there's a lot of ways to attack it, but recognizing this is incredibly disinformation, and we're here to help you kind of understand and get on that footing for some of these concepts. So first, we'll go through there. By the way, I will say there are 7 chapters, so this shouldn't be too long. Chapters 1 and 2 are really the why and how of the rate study. So why are we doing the rate study? Those first 3 slides I shared with you is that why. And then the how we develop rates is chapter 2. So the consultant included the methodology for rate development. So that kind of overarching thought process, how we get to creating rates, and then a high level cost allocation for our entire budget between sanitary and stormwater, because that's the first key. We have to identify what type of rates we're going to collect based on the cause of the cost. These figures are really good explanations of that process. Chapter 3 discusses sanitary rates specifically, and really it identifies 2 different rate structure options that can move forward during that public engagement phase. So they identified are key sections to review. The first bullet I will say is, talking about, we take our full budget, we allocate it between sanitary and stormwater related costs, and then we go further under each section. We identify what is the driver of those costs. So what are the service characteristics? What is something that a customer is doing to drive the costs in our budget? And that's that key next step that you'll see. The conclusions and considerations for rate options for both this chapter, sanitary rates, and for the next chapter, stormwater rates, is a really good place to look if you want to look at all of the policy considerations that have gone into it. There's also a really good table that kind of identifies the various issues and how they measure up against the criteria that were shown under goals and objectives. So equity, cost of service principles, etc. Chapter 4 discusses stormwater rates. It follows a very similar content structure as the sanitary rate side. However, there are far more options to consider. So there's 5 options for stormwater rates. That's just as the rate study goes into that's in part based on the industry benchmarks and the comparisons that were done earlier on in the rate study. Another key point I wanted to note here is the residential tiering is another concept that is discussed, which is kind of a sub option underneath all the different rate options. This is one of the tough parts about talking about this. There are a lot of options and potential options contingent on a choice. This section is probably the most dense in terms of a wide variety of options and paths that public engagement, that public and outreach will produce for us. Chapter 5 is specifically related to Clean River Awards. Really the biggest thing to note here is that table 5.5 in the report is a really great summation of the way that the consultant recommended us, not recommended, but provided options on how to change. I will say Clean River Awards is a little bit different than the rates, SDCs, and the fees, in that all those rates, SDCs, and fees are more of, here are options that you can choose. Whereas the Clean River Awards section is more of, hey, you can keep doing what you're doing, or you can do this different thing. So it's kind of an either or, whereas the other ones are various options. Chapter 6 is broken into 2 slides because it deals with system development charges and line and branch charges, so our capital charges generally. And each of the different SDCs has 2 different options of how we can charge it, and 3 different valuation estimates that kind of underpin each of those charges. So there's multiple ways we can calculate the base for how we're going to charge. And then there are 2 different ways for how we can actually charge that to a given customer. And that's what chapter 6 really focuses on. I'll go to the next slide just to show, same for stormwater. And then for line and branch charges, and then for fees, which is going to be the next section, which is going to be the next chapter, really the consultant provided an overview, a review of the methodology that BES uses for that, and kind of options that BES can use to get better, so to speak, tweaks in how BES does what it currently does. So whereas the rates and system development charges say you can choose option A and here's the dollar result of that, the line and branch methodology review and the fees, which I'll go to that next slide, is more about, here is the way you can calculate these fees. So the consultant isn't saying, here's the outcome of $1, but rather here's the process you can use to get to that $1. So I know this was a relatively quick presentation, but there's a lot of content in here. As I said, we're talking about our sanitary rates, stormwater rates, system development charges, fees, our other capital charges. It really does cover the gamut of many ways that the Bureau collects revenue from folks. And this report tries to outline chapter by chapter. Please, as you read the report, refer to this PowerPoint if you're looking for, oh, there's a specific option I wanted to dig in greater detail, or I didn't quite understand this, hopefully the sections that are tagged in this PowerPoint can be a guidepost for you to better understand this incredibly technical and complex material. This is not an easy task for folks that are in the know, so to speak, of folks within the Bureau of BES that have been doing work related to this. So it's very dense, and we look forward to helping you move forward on that in continual conversations we have.
Thanks, Anthony. That was great. Appreciate it. In terms of next steps, we're looking at doing the public outreach phase. We're still working through the technical side of that and how that's going to look, but we are certainly going to be bringing you all along the way. So this is just marks the beginning of the conversation. We'll have much more to say as we go.
Thank you.
And thanks
Ken.
again for staying so late.
Yeah, well, back at you. Thank you very much. Can I just ask, Karen Williams speaking, probably Ken, but Ken and/or Anthony, can you just give us a couple sentence overview of sort of time frame, like when this report will be released to the public, and the next sort of checkpoint where you'll be looking for pub feedback?
Yeah, well, certainly we're preparing to release the report to pub today. So probably tomorrow, given the time, but we'll get it to pub staff later today, and they can send it out to the pub. We're looking at probably beginning a public outreach during the summer, and it's going to last through the summer, and hopefully we'll narrow things down by late December, early January, so we can build that into the rate hearing for the 2024 fiscal. That kind of what you're looking for, Karen? I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I was just asking for a kind of a refresher on what's going to happen with the information that's in this study and how pub can stay apprised and how we can make our opinions known at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I would encourage you as you're looking through the document, if you have questions, write them down. That's going to be the best way to get so we can respond to all the questions, and maybe pub staff can filter for duplicate type questions. So I think going forward, that's the first step. As we develop the public outreach phase, we'll come to pub and share that with you as well. So that'll dictate a little bit more about how the rest of this is going to flow.
All right, thank you so much. And again, thanks to both of you and all the members for staying half an hour over. We have 30 seconds, Eliza says. And this is important, and this is a quick update on the recruitment process, or it's underway.
Yep. Just to let you all know, I sent an email out again today, and I'll probably forward it to you all board members for a millionth time tomorrow. But do recruit, send it. Think of like a person, organizations that you can send it out through, because it will be closing on Monday, the 18th. That's it.
Recruit. All right, I will, with that, entertain a motion to adjourn. Thanks again for staying late. See you all on the 21st. 21st, right? Yes, 21st at 11.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for your good work today.
Thank you.